Jane McGonigal, who is currently at the University of California-Berkeley.
Thanks, Henry. Is my mic working? Yes, I think it is. Okay. Do I have to hit any buttons to make the slides come up? Or are they coming up on their own? Great. Okay. So I'm here today to talk to you about alternate reality learning. That is to say, learning that's taking place in a new genre of gaming called alternate reality gaming. Mimi Ito in the earlier presentation talked about off-the-book learning, and right now that's the stage that alternate reality games are at. There are not currently alternate reality games being produced for classrooms, but there are lots of alternate reality games being played by students of high school age and college age right now, and certainly could be designed younger. So I'm going to talk about the kinds of learning that's already happening off the book and encourage you to think about ways that this very interesting genre of gaming might have exciting applications in classrooms. To tell you a little bit about the genre, it was invented in the year 2001, and there have been about 50 alternate reality games known to have been conducted around the world since 2001. About a dozen of them have been high-profile corporate games, professionally produced games. The rest have been fan-based or grassroots indie games, people who make their own games to play while they're waiting for the next commercial alternate reality game. They tend to be pervasive and persistent. By pervasive, I mean that they don't have just a single presence like a program you would run on your computer or a game that you'd put into a console. They use a variety of platforms, so email, chat, websites, phone calls, billboards. A popular saying among alternate reality game designers is, if we could get your toaster to print out a mission, we would do it. And we might, in fact, be doing that in future games. But the idea that anything that has an electronic current running through it can be co-opted for the game, and so that it will reach out and touch you in your everyday life in sort of unexpected settings. And that's where the persistent aspect of the games come in. When a game kicks off, it's run like a campaign, and it's always playing. So a game might start and then run for 3 or 4 months, and at any time, 24/7, the game might ask you to do something. It might send you an email, it might ping you with a mission, it might update a website. So it has a persistence to it. And then the final quality is they are massively multiplayer, but what is unique about them is that if you have 10,000 people playing the game, you will have 10,000 people playing on the same team. They're not competitive games. They're intensely collaborative, and they encourage the formation of large-scale communities. Some of the largest active communities online that have been successfully maintained and organized to be really effective have been in the space. So there have been 2 really big ones to date. The first was the one that invented the genre. It's called The Beast. I'm finishing my PhD dissertation on that and how the communities work in that game. And the second big high-profile game is I Love Bees, and I just finished serving as a puppet master, one of 4 puppet masters for that project. So I'm both a researcher in the space and a designer in the space. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about I Love Bees since it's more recent and since I actively worked on the design. And just to let you know, I was doing research on this genre, how the communities were forming, and the interesting things they were doing, and I got recruited by the designers of that game, The Beast, to work as a real-time ethnographer during the production, during the lead-up and production of the game, during the campaign itself, to watch the players, to see what they were doing, and to suggest modifications to design and new kinds of feedback, so that as the game was running, we could use real-time research on the communities and real-time ethnography to change the game as it was being played. So it was a really interesting transition from academia to design and practice. Okay, so the 2 things that I was researching that I tried to funnel into design, one, that these communities tended to be lasting. The game would end, but they would linger. And the second was that there was an intense desire to keep playing when the game was over, to apply the skills and the techniques that they had learned and to use the social networks they developed to address real-world problems, to look for similar situations in their real lives that they felt they could keep playing, they could actually take this knowledge and this skill set and translate it to the real world. And from an educational standpoint, I think that is, in many ways, the holy grail, to go through an experience and then to have something you can take away and not only be able to apply, but to be passionate about, to be constantly looking for opportunities to keep that learning alive. So, This is one of my favorite phrases, life imitates ARG. That's something an alternate reality gamer said on a forum. And the idea that because these games use everyday technologies, because they're played in real time, so it feels like they're a part of your everyday life, when the game's over, nothing's really changed except that particular game has finished playing, but you're still you, the technology's still there, the community's still there, you can keep playing, you can keep solving problems and keep working. So life imitates ARG. Let me give you an idea of what they're actually doing in that time span. So ARGs are interactive dramas played out online and in real-world spaces, taking place over several weeks or months, in which dozens, hundreds, or thousands of players come together online. Small ARGs might have a couple hundred players. The biggest ARGs, 600,000 active players and 2 million people watching. They form collaborative social networks and work together to solve a mystery or problem that would be absolutely impossible to solve alone. To give you a concrete example, during I Love Bees, we had 9,000 real-world or pervasive players, people running around real environments, outdoors, cities, public spaces, and 600,000 people playing online, collaborating to do a bunch of stuff. They were investigating a mystery. Who hacked the website, ilovebees.com, and why? That was their call to action. Figure out who hacked this website and why they're hacking it. They collected GPS data coordinates and used a variety of technology to locate those actual places in the real world. They found payphones at all of those locations in 50 states and in 8 countries around the world. And they answered 40,000 payphone calls over the course of 4 months. So you would show up at the GPS coordinate at the time and date given on the site or embedded in the image that you had managed to decrypt. The phone would ring and you would be asked questions, you would talk to characters from the game, you'd be given a mission on site. They were also compiling, reconstructing, and interpreting a distributed 6-hour radio drama divided into 15-second fragments. So each time you answered a ringing payphone, you would get 15 seconds of fragment. And then if we all got 15 seconds of audio fragment, we could come together and pool them together and actually hear what had happened in the story that week. They also learned a fictional programming language called Flea++, after one of the characters of Pious Flea. And at the end of the campaign, they had learned so much of it that they were able to reconstruct the broken website that had been hacked. They solve specialty research puzzles, so puzzles that might require you, for instance, to know the nicknames for all of the genetic mutations that occur in fruit flies, and use that to solve a puzzle. They generated 1.5 million plus forum posts. One of my jobs during the game was to track everything they were saying about it. Those are just the posts that I found in the different communities that were playing. There were probably more, but there's a lot of writing involved. They created and maintained blogs and wikis to help people know what they were doing to contribute to the game, to help people come into the game. There's a real learning culture around it. If you come in a month after the game's been playing, there's a lot to catch up on. So they're actively teaching new players, recruiting and teaching new players. And they constructed ad hoc networks for real-time communications and mobilizations. So they would send thousands of players out into the streets to the payphones on the same day, and then they'd have all kinds of online sites that you could call into. They set up toll-free 1-800 numbers, so you could call in with information from the field, and they were really good at real-time communications and mobilization, so sort of teaching them how to be smart mobs. This is the kind of learning that took place. They were interpreting and analyzing text and data. They were making persuasive arguments because they would have to, one, persuade characters to do things. They'd have to persuade other gamers that their interpretation was correct or that their strategy was correct. And they have to persuade people who weren't playing yet to start playing, because there's a lot in these games that ask you to recruit more people to help you out. Lots of verbal expression, written and oral. Logistical planning. For instance, how do you get someone to answer a payphone in a library that's closed in Ketchikan, Alaska, and you don't know anyone there, and the library is going to be closed, and it's inside the library. So lots of logistical planning. Facility with new digital technologies, so using software and using hardware and platforms. Our players are, first of all, GPS experts for all time. They were learning how to construct, extend, and operate successfully in social networks. What does it feel like to be part of a group of 10,000 or more, and how do you make your voice heard in that setting? And they're learning collective intelligence, how to collaborate, to do differentiated collaboration in large groups, to contribute in individual ways, and to to produce, as Mimi was saying, that it's really about having an individual contribution that is not necessarily something you can assess on the whole. You need to be with other people and do it, and learning how to organize that. So I just want to suggest 3 things that I learned from working on I Love Bees, which is how do you create the initial engagement, how do you require collaboration, and how do you make it persistent so that when the game's over, they keep using the learning that they've acquired. Designed for initial engagement, really effective to present a clear, rallying, unifying goal. Solve this mystery. You engage them with something that has emotional impact. You're clearly asking them, it's objectively, at the end of this game, you will either know this or you will not know this, you will have accomplished this or not. But the mysterious aspect, the emotional aspect is important, something that they can rally around, and they all have the shared goal, even if they're in different locations or going to be playing the game different ways. You can use story and character as a personal call to action. Why is this particular group of players needed? So if you want to do a game for an individual high school, why those high school players? Can you create characters that require their help as opposed to anyone else in the world at that time? So really make them feel like they're personally charged with playing this game. Designed for differentiated roles. So when the game launches, there should be lots of different stuff to do. Data collection, data processing, interpreting the results, social stuff, writing, expressive stuff. Start with lots of ways to insert yourself in the game, ways that players are comfortable, and then as the game continues, you can push them into areas that they're maybe not comfortable yet, but once you've got them engaged, that's when you can really stretch and grow them. Give players a meaningful audience, each other, the public, and other characters. There's a lot performing involved in these games where you're writing to characters, you're calling characters, you're engaging the public, you're going out. We had players who got themselves in the New York Times and on CNN because of what they were doing, and they had a visibility, and it made them feel important, and it made them feel like there was meaning to what they were doing. Similarly, they would write characters, 10-page essays, researching artificial intelligence and their theory about it that no one except for the character receiving this email would ever read, but that character was enough of an audience for them to go to put the effort into creating this document. It was meaningful for them to be heard in that way. And finally, real-time puppet master feedback. My job, as I said, was to watch what the players were doing 24/7. I, didn't leave my apartment for months, and that was fine, mostly. But you can look at what they're doing and then give them push back at exactly the right level. So people in game design always talk about flow and how do you keep it challenging enough that they feel stretched, but not so challenging that they feel overwhelmed. And people talk about successful games being the games that pit one player against another because you can really get that immersion and head-to-head situation. Well, in these kinds of games, the people designing the games are changing it in real time to constantly keep you at that level. If you solve something on the first day, we'll pretend that we didn't think that was going to take you a week. We'll give you 10 things, even more challenging to do in half the time. So that real-time puppet master feedback, it really allows you to have this sort of flow. Design for massive collaboration. Really quickly, 4 ways you can make people collaborate instead of compete. 1, site-specific missions. You can't be everywhere at once. If we call a phone in Alaska, Hawaii, North Dakota, South Dakota, you're not playing this game by yourself. You've got to find people in those states and play with them. Distribute content. I'll show you mine if you show me yours. We were able, for instance, to use people's IPs so that when you came to my website, you got a little snippet of information, but someone with a different IP would get a different snippet, and we're not going to give you any more than the one little piece unless you figure out how to forge your IP and teach everybody else how to forge it too, which is also good. And you still have to communicate and teach. But so force people to combine the stuff and share their data. Spectacle and magnitude. You can just ask them to do things in sheer numbers. We need 1,000 people to show up at this location, or we need 10,000 people pinging this website at this exact second. Force them to generate the sheer numbers. There's pleasure in spectacle and magnitude. And finally, what I call massively multitasking. How many players does it take to change a light bulb while also, decorating a payphone and building breaking into someone else's website, and and it all has to happen at the same time. And the information you get from hacking the website and from going to the payphone needs to funnel back and forth. So aggressively multitasking your teams. And finally, designing for persistence. How can you make sure that all this amazing stuff that they're doing and learning and feeling and trying out continues to happen? The most important thing, I believe, is to encourage real play, not role play. You address them as who they are. When a character calls them, it calls them with their real name. It's in your real neighborhood, your real communities, your real everyday life. So it's you who were successful in the game, not a character you made up, not an avatar. You had success, and that personality persists after the game is over, and so you own it. Use everyday technologies. Ubiquitous computing persists. If you use things like Friendster and blogs and Wikipedia and things that people can keep using because it's there and it's free and it's easily available, they'll be able to keep playing. Use symbols and places that will be re-encountered. One reason we use payphones is because you're always walking by payphones, and you're often walking by payphones that are ringing. And at the end of the game, our players always pick up ringing payphones. And the kinds of interaction that can transpire: is there somebody who needs your help? Somebody you can give information to? Or is this going to be a fun interaction? They persist, and so if you can pick symbols and places in the local environment and media environment, they're likely to continue to engage. And finally, ask players to create a collective infrastructure that has digital traces. If they set up a wiki, if they set up blogs, if they set up a forum, if they set up an IRC channel, you can go into the same IRC channel for this game that finished in November and still find hundreds of players who are chatting about other real-world problems. So ask them to choose collective infrastructure that they can keep and own and publicly and freely access when the game is over. These are some websites if you're interested in the genre, and my website, and I took a few extra minutes, so I apologize. Yes, more for questions.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Next up, we have Rikke Magnussen from Learning Lab Denmark.
Yeah. I'm from Learning Lab Denmark, from Center for Learning Games, where we both develop and do research in learning games. And I'm gonna present a game that we did and try along during the demo to address some of the questions that Henry raised for this panel. And so the game is called Homicide, and it's an IT-supported role-playing game that we developed. And it's cross-disciplinary science and Danish education for children aged 13 to 16. And it was developed by a group of researchers and developers, like physically sitting together for half a year, developing in the same room, discussing, and the group, it was a very diverse group. It was IT people, it was writers, film people, and I was there with I have a science background, so I was at the science part of it, and we actually tried to put all this together. What the game is about is that the pupils play forensic experts solving a murder case, and this investigation takes place both in virtual space, but mostly in the classroom, around tables, in the laboratories where they do chemical tests and all the science stuff. So and the overall educational goal here was to make a game that would support the working with inquiry processes, to build up theories, to collect data, to analyze them, and to support your theory or throw it away if it doesn't fit with it. Right. So I'll actually go online and try and show you the game and hope that it will work. Here. So this is what the children are presented with when they come in. This is the interface, and the story is basically that they can come in as investigators, and the local police has already been there, and there's been this murder. There's actually been 4 murders in a small town in Denmark, so they're pretty busy. And the class is divided into 4 groups, and each group get their case. So they have independent cases, and we did that to support collaboration, not just in the groups, but also cross groups. So we gave them independent cases not to have a direct competition between the groups. We also made some of the characters, some of the game characters, cross over in the different cases. So there will be some of the same characters in the different cases. Because it's a small town and there's going to be some of the same troublemakers in this town that always make trouble and always get into fights. So we actually saw that they would go and help each other whenever they saw they had the same characters in their cases. Let's see. Yeah, but the first thing they do when they come in here, there's different reports that has already been filed there, like the report from the doctor that's been out there. And in this case, it's a young boy that's been stabbed in the local sports center. So the doctor's been out there and measured the temperature of the body and made a report of all the physical details there. And they later on, the students will use this for going in and finding the time of death of this boy and then comparing it to the. Yeah, I know this is a bit bloody, and I had some comments here in the States on the bloodiness of it. But I can assure you, there's no people dead here. It's just actors. We had a very good makeup artist connected to this, and he did a good job, as you can see. So all these data they will use to go on later and analyze all the data to find out things like time of death. They do DNA tests, find out there's been blood. I'm just going to show you. These are the pictures from the sports center. First of all, there's all the thing that's been found there. I hope it's really going to download a little quicker here. There's a lot of things that's been found here, and I'm only showing you like some of the features of the game here. But like there's splashes of blood on the wall, there's a screwdriver, there's fingerprints, there's a mobile phone, and things like that they can use for solving the case. They can go on later to the forensic handbook that is on the policeman's desk and then seek for the right techniques, how to handle these data. Okay, the local police has also made video of the whole scenery. Let's see if it works. And we really try to make this as look as real as possible. Maybe it's not loading at all. Let's see. Anyway, we really try to make this look as real as possible. So we consulted retired police officers to here it is, to tell us the real story, to teach us the right techniques. So all this, yes, somebody was sick after the murder. I'm sorry. This is just before lunch. Right. And so we try to make it as real as possible. This is something that I don't know about the American police, but the Danish police would typically do something like this: go in and make, with a small camera and make recordings of everything that was there at the crime scene when they first arrived. There's some fingerprints there, and that was part of the strategy was to make it as real and serious as possible. So real cases, And we had that reaction all along with when the pupils played this, that they kept asking, so is this the real techniques? Is this how it's really done? And it is. And we tried to copy the techniques as good as we could and compare it to what teachers do in their class. So we had a big group of teachers connected to this who advised us how they normally work, and then we tried to transform it into the game. Right, I'm gonna go out of this. And what we so when they analyze these different clues, they go on to the forensic handbook, and they would go like to DNA techniques, where they would so like the real investigators, when they want to find out how they handle all these different kind of data, they go on to their handbook and find the different techniques of like doing DNA, and that's of course where all the curriculum material and all the learning material took place also. So it was this. We tried to make this first person experience where children would take on. I'm just going to close down the game and then address some of the panel questions. Yeah, so we tried to make this first person experience where children would take on this professional identity and work as a forensic expert with the techniques and with all the group teamwork that was included in this. And this is part of a longer study where we're trying to find out how this social learning, not just in groups, how pupils learn between each other and learn from each other and develop ideas, but also cross groups. How does this cross group development of ideas happen in this? Because we could see that there was a lot of ideas developing. There were tools being constructed along the way, diagrams, because there's so many data here that they had to invent some tools to handle all these data, and we could see how this spread across the class and how it was reinvented. And finally, I just want to say that as you can all see, there's no expensive 3D environments here because we designed it for the physical and the virtual interaction, and mostly the interaction out in the class and in the laboratories, and it was the stories of the characters and the real techniques that actually was driving the game. So that's one answer to how you maybe make inexpensive games.
Okay, next up we have Celia Pearce from the University of California-Irvine.
Hi, I'm not going to show anything today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that I'm working on with my colleagues, Robert Niederfer and Walt Skokie, at the Game Culture and Technology Lab and Cal IT Squared at UC Irvine. And one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about, since this is about creativity and innovation, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process and the partnership than the actual end product, partially because we're in the middle of it right now. So one of the things, one of the places I want to start with is that in our group we have explored over the last couple of years, and the Game Culture and Technology Lab is really devoted to exploring and creating new forms of game culture. And is that me doing that? It must be. Oh.
No, mine is not.
Okay, it must be my hair or something. Anyway, so we we did explore the possibility of working in the context of schools, and we just felt that that would be too constraining to our own research agendas moving forward. And so we actively pursued a relationship with the Discovery Science Center in Santa Ana. And this is kind of, I would characterize as what Henry describes as one of the warp zones. And it's also kind of both off the books and somewhat off the screens, to use Mimi's expression from earlier. And there are a couple of interesting things about this venue for us. In Orange County, which is where our university is located, virtually every school child goes to the Discovery Science Center at least once in their school career, and most often, many times. And it is probably the primary location where they get any kind of in-depth science learning outside of the classroom, and even perhaps inside of the classroom. The other thing about our area in particular is that the Discovery Science Center is located in Santa Ana, which has the highest incident. It's considered to be one of the highest ESL areas and also low-income areas in the state of California. So it also allows us to address some of the digital divide issues that are inherent in education. So we sort of started with this idea that we would like to explore a relationship with the museum, and we had a couple of agendas which I think are really interesting for research institutions. One of them was to partner with them. They are in the business of bringing scientific content to a mass audience, and we're in the business of doing scientific research and creating experimental media. So we thought that the opportunity just at the baseline for using them and working with them as a distribution outlet for the research that we were already doing was a really great opportunity. And currently, we've already had one visualization project that was developed in a lab that was just shown as is in the museum. It just happened that one of our researchers, Jörg Meyer, had developed a fly-through simulation of a pig's heart. And it turned out, we didn't even know this, but through discussion, that the Discovery Science Center had a special event planned about pigs. So they were able to just put in a week-long installation of this fly-through game, which was enhanced with some interactive programming by one of the grad students working with Dr. Meyer. There's another project that was also a research project that they're currently developing a proposal to put into the museum. So just at the baseline, we have all this content already. We want to get it out to a mass audience. So that creates a wonderful partnership opportunity. The second half of the relationship revolves around an exhibition that the museum is doing on dinosaurs called, I don't know if they have an official name for it yet, but it's a very hands-on interactive exhibit. It's a little, pedagogically, it's a little odd because it combines both dinosaur learning and also some of the basic skills curriculum for the California schools around biological and life sciences. So what we're trying to do is kind of incorporate both of those content areas in the exhibit. What we have been, one of the research areas that we've been working on, primarily Dr. Nidafer, has been developing this notion of pervasive identities in games. So what he's been doing is developing a technique for people having a persistent identity that's device independent. So that means that I can develop a game identity. I can play, let's say, on a computer in my lab at school. Then I can go home to my home computer, log in, and have all the attributes of my identity that I accumulated in the classroom. And I can also then go to the museum and have the museum installation know what my attributes are and my identity. And so the way that this particular exhibition is structured is that we have a pervasive monitoring system throughout the exhibit that allows us to track what the kids are doing when they're actually on site. And each completed task that they do in the exhibition goes into a persistent game identity that then carries over into a web-based gaming experience. So what that means is that the children can go back and forth between the home, the museum, and the classroom and keep accumulating various attributes of this game identity and play components. And one of the things that we wanted to try to do there is, again, I really like the work that Jane was showing about this notion of extending the learning beyond one particular context and encouraging, Jim G came and spoke at UCI a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned Crowley as concept of islands of expertise. So we're trying to encourage kids to develop interest areas within the context of both life sciences and dinosaurs to then pursue further. So part of what we like about this is that once you get out of the museum environment and you go back to the classroom or the home, the game can also point you into real world content that has to do with areas that you're interested in. The other thing that we are really interested in is thinking about this as, again, we've talked, and last year at this particular event, there seemed to be a general sense of, I would say, cynicism or lack of enthusiasm about the school environment. And part of the thing that I think is really challenging is this pedagogical rift. There's kind of a certain principle which dominates the school systems here in the United States. And then there are a whole bunch of other educational principles which have basically been around for 20 years and have been scientifically proven to be effective, but for some reason or another, the school system hasn't really adopted these techniques. And so we really feel it's important that part of what we want to be able to do with the game experience is fill in the gaps that are left by school. And one of those gaps that's really vital is this social peer learning environment that people have talked about, and also the notion of developing individual expertise and identity. And someone pointed out in the last panel very aptly that in the real world, we're not encouraged to all be cookie cutters, right, as we are in school. In school, everyone's encouraged to learn the same thing, but once that's the last place you're ever going to be where knowing the same thing as everybody else is going to have any value for you at all. So we really think it's important to, and it's this notion of kind of what I would call guided autodidacticism, that we want to encourage kids to follow their instincts of learning, which occur in games naturally, but bring some of that material to them and then point them into professional areas that they might want to pursue further. So for example, we want to be able to, if kids are interested in paleontology, we want to be able to point them to something like the Paleontology Museum at UC Berkeley, I believe, where a lot of major paleontology work is being done, so that they can then, step out into the adult professional world and develop their own autodidactic methods for pursuing further learning. So that's a brief summary of what we're doing. I think I'll end it there so we have some time for discussion.
Great. All right, we now have some time for questions, comments from the floor. Is there someone who's got a microphone that's going around? Okay, well, why don't you speak loudly, Barry, and then hopefully someone with a mic will get here.
Thanks, Barry Joseph with Global Kids. Celia, I was struck by the comment you just made about the idea that high school is the last place where it's valuable to all know the same as everybody else. I think we can all understand what that means. And thinking about the idea of games that allow people to bring different parts of themselves to it in educational content is challenging for me to think about as an educator because of what it means to do the processing with young people. Which one of the speakers this morning was talking about how you can do that processing and talking about with students what they're experiencing. Can you talk more about, and this is open to all the panelists, what it would mean to have games that allow young people to bring different parts of themselves to it and each take different things from it? And at the same time be able to use that in a context that will allow for processing with one adult who's going to work with that group of, say, 20 and 30, who can do something that's useful for everybody at the same time.
Okay, so I want to...
Can I just ask you to, when you say processing, not coming from a strictly educational background myself, can you say a few more words so I can
Sure.
get my note on
when I'm talking about processing, I'm talking about being able to work with a young person or a group of young people who just experience something to be able to allow them to take one step back and process it and seeing it from a critical perspective, which they may or may not have done on their own, but the presumption being that as the educator we have that perspective and we can help them learn to think from that perspective and then be able to perpetuate it on their own without us.
Something just to throw out quickly, and something you're probably familiar with alternate reality games, one of the things that players have to do is create guides and sort of records of the game. And they're, because they're ephemeral, they happen and then they go away, so the players want there to be some record of it. And also so that, as I mentioned earlier, people who come in late in the game can catch up and find ways to contribute. And so I think that as a tool, creating a record of the game, creating the story of the game. Well, here's what happened, here's how we figured it out, here was our first strategy, it didn't work, here's the strategy that did work. And then you've got, the puzzly people and the social engineering people and the literary interpretation people are all writing aspects of it, but they have to make it speak to the other group so that the puzzle people can understand why my interpretation of that letter relates to what they're doing, and then the people are going out and doing social missions and constructing, communications networks understand what the puzzles, how their strategy might relate to what they're doing. So having to communicate to each other through guides and through that sort of storytelling of how the game transpired might be useful for processing context. And as the teacher or the educator overseeing that process, would be possibly one way to go about it.
In the game we developed, we saw that that the students started developing tools, drawing diagrams, and these diagrams was actually also a tool of communicating the data and the inquiry process all along, like cross groups and so on. So they also use that as a communication tool. But I just want to say that at the moment I'm actually looking into how well they transfer this to other settings in the school. And I think what's crucial, at least in this game setting, is that the context around the game. How does the teacher handle this game? Because they do go in and work with the process of inquiry, but whether they're actually able to transfer that to another setting, school setting, like the chemistry class, I think it really depends on the context. And I think that's something that is essential when you think about learning games, that you have to understand the context and how it plays into the game design.
Yeah, so just from the perspective of the project I was just describing, there are a couple aspects to it. One of them is because it's a public space, it's inherently social. So everyone's there all together. Often you're going to have multiple age kids in the same space, and this is something we're still trying to sort out in terms of we have specific educational goals for specific developmental levels. But at the same time, we don't want to block kids who are in the wrong developmental level from proceeding forward to another level of the game. So we're kind of letting the kids choose what level they want to be at. The other thing that we think is really important is multimodal learning. So the exhibition components are very physical. They're not a bunch of kiosks. They're like treadmills that move circulatory systems and big bones that you have to assemble into a skeleton. And those things are then captured and recapitulated in the dynamic online environment. And I also just wanted to say, although I don't know if this really is relevant to your question, someone mentioned earlier this comment about the the school in which the girls are not allowed to sign up for the computer lab. And I think I don't think we should underplay this at all. I think the school context is very hostile to girls as far as technology is concerned. Boys are very competitive about maximizing their computer time, and girls are not equipped to deal on that level. And the school, obviously the teachers and the technical people also discriminate actively against girls. And in an environment like a public museum where the activity is guided but not restricted, I think you're going to find that there will be a lot more opportunities for girls to explore in whatever way they want. And also we're not starting with the screen. We're actually, part of what we like about this project that we're working on is that we're not starting on the desktop. We're starting in the museum, where it's a level playing field in many ways. And then the exhibit points them out to wherever they might have access to a computer.
Okay, in the back.
Hi, I'm Mark Prensky. Celia, you said something that brought up a theme that I want to suggest. When you said that the people in the museum were doing the pig exhibit and you had the thing and nobody knew, I think sharing really needs to be a big theme of the kinds of things that we're talking about, not among ourselves, which is we're doing here, but with teachers. And how do we let the people who are out there who know that there's a game called Homicide and that game is applicable to such and such a level. How do we know that the kind of alternative reality games are useful for there? The easiest way, of course, is just putting it up on the web, because the quicker you do that, somebody can search it. But I would love to suggest as a theme for the conference ways that we can share the stuff that we have more easily with the wider teacher community, who I know, many of whom are anxious to learn about this stuff.
One of the things, I come from a museum exhibit background before I got into academia, and I've noticed that some of my colleagues in the virtual reality research area are starting to go to the American Association of Museums conference, and I think that's I hope that that's a growing trend, because I think especially for people doing, most of the NSF grants have an outreach requirement already written into them, which is never fulfilled. And I think that creates a tremendous opportunity for, like, I think that the Learning Lab project, for example, could be paired with some kind of scientific research project as an outreach component, and I think that could be a very effective collaboration.
I just want to say that we worked with the Danish publisher house on this, so they distributed this game the way they distribute all the book material. So that was one way for the teachers to get familiar with it.
Okay, more questions and comments over here. Or take the guy next to you, and then I'll go to the other side.
Hi, Howard Cutler from WGBH in Boston. On the alternate reality games, I stepped in a little bit late. I don't know if you talked about this, but is there an economic model underneath that? Is there money changing hands, and from who to who, and how does that work?
Okay, so there are three economic models by which they work, some which may be more applicable to doing games for the classroom than others. The first is using the games as a kind of promotion for established IP or brands. So for instance, I Live Bees was commissioned by Microsoft to promote one of their video games, Halo 2. The first alternate reality game was commissioned by DreamWorks to promote a Steven Spielberg film. So they have a lot of money to throw at these kinds of projects, and then the games are given away for free. And that's very useful in a lot of respects in terms of having a very low threshold for participation. Gaming can be very expensive, and these games can just be given away for free. Another model is the fan-based or grassroots model, where games are produced for really relatively low budgets, for a couple $1,000s that fans fund on their own. They can run games with one or two puppet masters for, say, 500 people, and just use free software, everyday platforms, and a lot of time and energy. So it's sort of, you can have a game run for $1 million, bells and whistles, or for a couple $1,000s. And then there's a third model emerging, the sort of pay-to-play, where you can purchase game elements or objects that might help you. So you can request a book with information about the universe, or you can pay for access to a live event. And that's a sort of experimental area. But the two main areas are getting a company to commission it, and Microsoft has sort of been the patron of the arts for this genre, saying, we think this is really exciting. We trust you, go do something interesting. And otherwise, people who play these games have an incredible propensity to go out and produce their own. I said there have been about 50 well-known games or known games, but they do little versions for their friends, and it's a really transparent design model in terms of how you make these things. I think in terms of budgets, this can be done as a labor of love, or it can be a very professional venture, and there's a lot of room to play in between.
Can I just add to that? It struck me, it may sound like a corporate sponsorship is an outlandish idea for an educational game, but I don't know how many people watch Crime Scene Investigation on CBS. I've always thought, man, this would make a great science game, and I could totally see that a program like that sponsoring a game like this for even a school application or an online informal science education.
Okay, over here.
So I'm Christina Conati from the University of British Columbia, and I just wanted to go back to this issue of individual differences and what different students might bring to the games and learn from these games. So for Jane, for example, I was wondering, you listed a set of skills that you found students or players developed by playing these games, and I was wondering how did you assess those, and if you found that they were sort of like uniform skills that were learned by all the players, or whether some players became more skilled at, say, persuasive arguments versus using IT, for example. And for Rikke, if you have done any formal studies on how students actually learn inquiry skills from this environment, because I know that there are some studies showing that not all students do that well with this sort of like open learning environments, and a lot of the success of the interaction depends on pre-existing, for example, metacognitive skills. So some students are better than others at getting a lot out of this sort of like unstructured interactions.
So I'll just throw a couple ideas out quickly. It's a great question, and there's lots of different ways to answer it. So a few things that we did to sort of measure what was going on. One is that many of the players keep blogs about their experience gaming, and you can just read what they say, and you can read their descriptions of being confounded by something at the beginning of the game, and towards the ends of the game they're much more confident and strategic and focused. And you can just there's a lot of expression, journal keeping about the learning that takes place, and so there's that's a useful sort of qualitative way to see how are they expressing what they're learning. The blogs and the forums are a great way to look at that. There's more sort of objective criteria, like in terms of creating these real-time networks. At the beginning of the game, we would have a mission where we would hide something on one of the web pages, and there might be hundreds of web pages, and then we'd call a payphone and tell them, at the end of the day, we were going to call a payphone somewhere else in the country, and whoever was at that payphone had to know what that three-word phrase was hidden on the website. So go find it, and then get everybody who's answering payphones everywhere to know about it. Later, we got it down to 20 seconds. You had 20 seconds to find it and get anyone in the world. We're going to call a phone in 20 seconds. And that's something that you can measure the effectiveness of how quickly they can mobilize and create that network. And finally, things like, something I didn't get to mention in my talk is there's real-time puppet mastering. You can do open-ended problems or open-ended challenges where you just wait to see what they come up with, and you guide them towards the most interesting or creative response. And the fact that they learned this fictional programming language was not something that had been part of the original design. There were little bits of fictional code that the site was spitting out, and we noticed that the players were keeping track of them and trying to analyze them and figure out, is there some correlation between this bit of code popping up and what happened to the site that day? And then they started keeping a big log of this, and then they made a little book of it. And the CTO of the group that was running this, 42 Entertainment, said, yeah, they're making incredibly coherent sense out of this. I didn't think it made that much sense, but it does. So they essentially wrote the programming language, and then we were able to test them on it by having them do this real-time, sending bits of the code in, and we changed the site based on what they had decided was, the way that the programming would work. And so that was something, because it's so open-ended and real-time puppet mastering, we saw they were learning something that we didn't even know we were teaching, and then we were able to design a challenge. Okay, if you really know this program, use it to rebuild the site. So.
Right, and I just want to answer the assessment question. I've done this, as I said, this is part of a longer study that's going to continue at least the next year. But I did some first observations of the pupils playing this game, and I'm actually at the moment trying to construct some kind of assessment of what they get from working with this process of inquiry. Because one thing is to work with it, another thing is if you're able to apply it to other settings. So, but I find this is something that a lot of people ask for, but I think it's essential to focus at the process of inquiry. That's the overall goal with the game, to work with the scientific process and scientific way of thinking, and not particularly if you learn something about DNA or math or physics, because maybe you will, but to us it's more important if you get familiar with the scientific way of thinking when you meet science problems. I'm trying to construct some kind of assessment to that. But what I'm like even more interested in is how, because I've seen that a lot of ideas and tools develop across the class and spread, and that's nothing new, because that happens like in game cultures. That's well known, but also in school culture. But if we can transfer this kind of game culture into the science class, that's interesting. Like having experienced gamers learn newbies how to do science and do the game. That's the project for next 3 years, to see how that happens, how ideas develop.
Okay, there was a question over there?
Yes, my name is Steve Glyer. Question I have deals with the category of 21st century skills of inventive thinking and risk-taking, etc. And I'm curious, in the gaming industry, is there a way, metrics is the problem area of trying to find what those skills are and how do you measure whether you've mastered them. And I'm wondering, is there any work in artificial intelligence that looks at mastery and identifies that a student or a child has achieved mastery of those skills?
Maybe we should open that.
I don't know what they're doing with this now, but when I worked for the Information Sciences Institute at USC, they were doing player modeling. So they would try to, as the player is playing, build a model of the player so that they could understand what the player was learning and how the player was applying that learning to the gaming experience. I don't know how far they've taken that, but we were doing that back in, I think, 99, 2000.
Okay.
No, it just occurred to me that with some of this stuff, it wouldn't be cognitive modeling as much as modeling of large-scale distributed systems that would enable, I mean, at least with the ARGs, it seems like that kind of modeling could be really interesting. But my question was, when Jane was talking about the sort of amateur version of the game production, initially I'd been so jazzed about ARGs with the idea that you could orchestrate something where you have an educational agenda behind the puppet master thing, which still seems exciting. But there's this other thing that you're suggesting, which is that if there's, I'm kind of curious to hear more about what the building blocks are for the amateur stuff, because Jim was just saying that there's a revival of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, whoa. So there's sort of these basic toolkits for people to create games that have been around for a while, right? Which seems like that's kind of happening at a grassroots level. So if you can release a toolkit where kids are actually designing their own experiences among local peer networks, where it's like you get together to do your ARG with fairly small scale groupings even that are totally non-commercial and actually don't require more than, buying the kit, the equivalent of that. That strikes me as a really exciting direction that seems to go back to some of the earlier dynamics with something like D&D.
I'm actually working on an environmental game right now that uses real scientific data, and one of the things we want to do is have a level builder so that people can develop their own simulations within the game. So this is a kind of a new project. We haven't done it yet, but it's something we definitely want to try.
And there are some beginning moves in that direction. There's a website, deaddrop.us, like deaddrop.us, which is a guide for aspiring puppet masters, intended solely for fans, mostly high school and college kids interested in doing it on their own. And there's a book called This Is Not a Game by a former PM for a couple smaller commercial ARGs that's written in a very clear, I mean, non-jargon, non-technical. Here's how you use everyday technologies. This is like how, use email, set up an account for your character. Here's how to set up a blog for your character. Here are the different tools that players will use to try and interact with your missions. And so there are some beginning elements out there for fans, not developed for teachers, yes, but some good stuff to look at if anyone's interested.
Okay, over here, and then let's take this question here, and we'll need to cut it down.
This is not a game book. Sounds like an interesting game. Having just designed games with my grandkids out of manila folders and little pieces, it sounds like a great idea, a toolkit. I think it'd be very motivating. But my question was, for me, the ultimate game is language games. And I'm wondering about puppets and puppet masters. How do people react to the notion that if you're a puppet master, what does that make them? So, for example, I also wanted to sort of extend that. And the notion for me has been, if language is the ultimate game, then life also is a game. The perspective of Homo ludens. So it also occurs to me, how do we create this game of serious education? And how do we win?
This reminds me of the Infinite Game, which I'm a big fan of. There's only one game. But without going too far into this, anyone who's ever played an ARG knows that the puppet masters are in fact the puppets, and that the players run the game, because it's the power is in the interpretation. There are some things you can control as a puppet master, like we choose the GPS coordinates, but the players choose whether or not to go, what to bring when they go, what to expect when they go, what to tell other players to do when they go, they do in fact, keep us up later at night, and being responsive to their expectations and their goals. For the first alternate reality game, the anecdote that people like to talk about, the original designers, they had 30 days worth of content planned, and it ranged from super easy, they'll get it on the first day, to they're going to have to beg us at the end of 30 days to give them more hints, and we'll help them out. And the first group of players that stumbled upon the game got through everything on the first day. And so from that point on, that really set the dynamic of the relationship between puppet masters and the gamers is ultimate respect from the puppet masters to the gamers. They will always come up with a better solution than you, so you better be ready to rewrite the solution. They will always go faster than you think they will, so be ready with something new. And then they have great respect and trust for your ability to catch up to them. So power is a really interesting issue, and the perceived power from outsiders, and is it about manipulation, and will there be some mob, if they take a life of their own, how do you control that? So power is a really important issue to look at, and I don't mean to give a glib response to it at all, but the players, their interpretive power is truly what drives the game.
Can I just add one thing to that? Jane brought up a really important point, which I've been talking about a lot lately in talks I've been giving about this sort of inversion of Moore's law, that as the technology becomes cheaper, faster, and more powerful, the demands on the content providers become higher. And at some point, it's going to become impossible, both in the game industry and in the educational field, for us to keep up with the players. So I'm kind of advocating approaches which include a lot of user-created content. If you look at something like The Sims, for example, there's thousands and thousands of user-created characters. In Second Life, the entire world, 27,000 inhabitants have created the whole entire world themselves. So I think we also need to think in more constructivist terms about maybe part of the educational learning is in making the games as well as playing them. Because I'm just not sure how, if someone's using 30 days of content in a day,